Hey there, Jay here. Just wanted to make sure you know that I have a new teacher training group starting online in October. And you can get an early registration discount of 40% off until September 7th. To find out more and register, go to jbrownyoga.com/training. And to say a little something more about the training here, I'm concluding my series of mini talks with current participants this week with Amelia.
Hi, Amelia.
Hello. How are you?
I'm well. Lovely to see you. I'm so glad you made us this time. Thanks for doing it. And the reason why I was so excited that you scheduled it this time, because this has also been an opportunity for me to get a little bit of feedback.
Yeah.
And there was two things that I thought that I wanted to ask you about. One is just that we don't live on the same side of the planet. And so I think that's often kind of a challenge for people in terms of the training. And I've done my best to make it still possible, to have those alternate meetings where even somebody who doesn't live in a different time zone, but just has like a life and a schedule where they can't make it to a lot of live meetings. My hope is that someone could still get the things that they would need from the training so that it could fit in their lives better. And I sort of see you as someone like that because you haven't been able to come as many live meetings. But when I do see you and when we have interacted, I feel like you've been with it. So can you say something about how that's been to kind of not be able to come to live meetings and still engage with the training?
Yeah, I mean, it's not worked out the way that I thought it would, but it's still been really special and wonderful. And I think the thing that I find really interesting in the training is I've been there. I've watched every training video. I've watched every replay, not always on the same time that you all are, but I've really felt included. And I've never felt like if I had a couple of months off, I couldn't come to a meeting, or I felt like I needed to explain why I'd not been there, or nervous, like, what have you been doing? I've never felt any of that. And it is weird because I know you all intimately. But you don't know me in the same way. But again, it's strange, but not a negative experience to have had that. I've still felt a part of the group. And when I came on the programme originally, I'd planned to get up in the middle of the night and come. And very quickly I realised I need my sleep.
Yeah.
And I've also, as you know, had a couple of family things go on. So my father-in-law passed away. My mum's got dementia and she's rapidly declined this year, and so I wasn't expecting those things. But what I love about the programme is sometimes I've listened to the catch up on my way to my mum's when I've been going to see her. Sometimes I live just outside in the north of England, and we have beautiful moors up here. I've been walking and listening to the replays on the moors, and there is something really special about this training that enables you to take part where this meet you where you're at thing. And I've loved it, and I still very much feel a part of the group, which, I've probably only attended about 7 in-person sessions.
See, I would have thought it was more. I mean, I know it hadn't been a lot of them, but even still, we've had enough interaction and time where I know a little bit about you. And even just recently we had a meeting where it was like, you told me about, I don't know, maybe feeling a little bit more confident in potentially teaching, which was interesting. Because the other thing I wanted to ask you about was that a lot of people who've done the training kind of come with a lot of teaching experience already. Some of them have had like a lot of other trainings that they've done. And I don't know that that's true of you. And I guess some people were intimidated by like that, like, because it's a high level training, they feel like that wouldn't be accessible to them. And I think it's pretty much accessible. I've had people who've never taught before and really are just coming in for their own personal practice too. So can you say something about that? Like what your experience level in terms of teaching or training was coming in, and how it was able to meet you where you were?
Yeah. There's a few things I want to speak to with that, Jay, because first of all, I thought I would feel imposter syndrome coming into this training, because when we did the first going round, like, what do you know about yoga? What's your experience? Why are you here? Most people are yoga teachers on this course or work in a capacity where they are in service. in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a yoga teacher. I did a meditation teacher training about 5 years ago, which I've never used. I've used it a couple of times when people have asked me to, but I did that for the same reason. I love meditation, I love yoga, and I just wanted to learn. And I've never felt outside-ish. I've never felt othered. I've never felt that I wasn't a part of the group and able to contribute. And I think that's, I don't have any formal yoga training. I've done a lot of personal practice and I've done a lot of reading myself. But I've thought it's brilliant in that respect, in being able to gain more knowledge and experience and also be around other people of different experiences. Because I'm not a yoga teacher, my experience has been different, I think. And if you think about like this analogy of an onion, where you're peeling layers off all the time when you start on your journey, your spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like every layer that you peel off, the inside is more oniony. It's like tastier, it's richer, it's more intense in flavour. And I feel like on this course, every week's been another layer and another layer and another layer. And I felt, things like chanting. I've chanted before, but I had such a deep experience when we did the chanting week, because I was like, yes, I love chanting. I forgot how much I loved it, and I've started incorporating that into my practice. I guess something interesting to mention is that it's unravelled my personal practice, this course. And I'm in quite a place of discomfort with it at the minute, but I'm okay with that.
Oh, wait a second. Say more. That's very intriguing. Unraveled your personal practice and it's uncomfortable, but you're okay with it, is what I heard you say.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So when I came to this course, I had quite a strong physical practice and I had a seated meditation practice. And the two things were quite separate. And my personal yoga practice has started to become less physical, hard over the years, but it still had a physicality to it. And what's happened is those two things are starting to merge in this course, but it's not there yet. And like loads of things in life, any sort of change, but especially I think when you almost have I don't want to use the word growth because I don't want it to feel destination-y or that you're trying, but when you have these experiences that deepen your practice in some way, I feel like that's what's happening to me, but I'm not there yet. And there's a bit in between that's uncomfortable. But the great thing is your yoga practice makes you know that everything's going to be fine. This is just the way it goes. It's a bit sticky and messy in this in-between bit, but something is going to come out of that is going to be worth the feeling of discomfort. So my personal practice is, it's just unraveled a little bit and it's not taken another shape yet.
I'm taking that as like a good thing because, and this is why I'd say I take it as a good thing because I don't want to unravel stuff for people necessarily, but what I hear for you and what I know a little bit in terms of our time together is that when the practice becomes less about like accomplishing certain physicalities or pushing yourself physically in certain ways, it starts to sometimes connect more outward into like life applications. And you mentioned you've been through some serious life challenges this year. And I think for me, that's where, like when that happens to someone in the course of a year, where like real shit happens in someone's life, like that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of practice, and like making the connection between the breathing and moving you're doing and whether or not that's connecting and helping you meet those inflections and challenges in your life is the kind of sticky unraveling part, but I think is like where it's at.
I really want to say, I don't know if I've articulated this particularly well, but I am absolutely seeing this as something that I've wanted for a long time and something that I can feel. And this is happening in my professional life too, to a certain degree, which I think is probably through I've spoken to you a little bit about this, but I'll speak to this. So I think this duality of two things is a theme in my life. So I work in the corporate world. Mainly, I work with charities, but the company that I work for is for profit. And for a long time, I have felt like I'm two people. I have this spiritual life and I have this thing I do at work, and never the two shall meet. And actually, what I'm finding is all the things in my life are merging and I'm becoming more me, more one person, more one thing. And there was such synchronicity with when you started talking on the course and the podcast about working in prisons with young offenders. Just that same week, I was asked to join the board of a charity that works with women that have experienced trauma. And I started to think, maybe this is the purpose piece, because I've really struggled with that. Lots of my friends have got vocations and I spend a lot of time with yoga teachers. And, you know, I've really struggled with that. Is my job aligned with who I am? But I don't think purpose is that. One of my spiritual teachers talks about being a prayerful person. And I know like prayer is a difficult word because it's a bit goddy, but
I'm all right with it.
how do you take it off the mat and into your life? And not everybody is a yoga teacher, can be a yoga teacher, wants to be a yoga teacher. And it's like, how can you be a yogi in your life? And so there's just lots of things that I think this stuff would have happened anyway, but I think this course has probably propelled it, given it momentum.
Well, I love that. You know, in terms of my standpoint and my approach and practice and what I think is important. And I don't know, you're a good example of the things that I hope someone might get from it. So let's leave it there. Okay. Thank you so much for taking this moment and sharing, Amy. We still got a couple months left together at least, and there'll be opportunities for us to still hang out in the future too. So in any case, it's been great to have you engaging with the training in the way that you do. And I love to hear the new direction that you feel like you find yourself going and where you're finding that merge professionally, and you're going to find some opportunity to maybe take some of what we've done together and kind of take on that role a little. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you, Jay, because it's a really, really brilliant program and I've loved it.
Oh, thank you. All right. I'll see you soon. Okay. We'll be in touch. Cheers. Bye.
All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to whoever you are, whether you're a new listener or a returning friend. I really do appreciate that you have decided to listen. And I so deeply hope that this moment finds you reasonably well. If your week was anything like mine, the answer to that question might be a little touch and go, because this last week was rough. I don't know about anybody else. I really got hit by some curves and some challenges and found myself really struggling a bit. And part of that for regular listeners was that I had some really challenging classes at the Juvenile Detention Center. Some of you know I've been teaching some classes at the local Juvenile Detention Center with the boys there. And up until now, for the last few months, it's been pretty easy sailing, but I came up against some pretty serious obstacles that were somewhat crushing on my soul this week. I'm not going to tell the story now. If you want, I'll tell you exactly what happened, but I'm going to tell you on the other side of today's talk, because today's talk informs, I think, some of what happened, at least for me. So if you want to stick around to the other side of today's talk, I will tell you what happened with those classes. But just to say, it was a really challenging week in very deep ways. Part of it has to do with bringing yoga practice to people in ways that invites some kind of subtler healing process. I know that yoga practice is sort of foundationally healing in certain ways, like just moving your body and on just some kind of baseline level. Yes, getting people doing some breathing and moving forms is likely to be helpful in one way or another. But when you've been at it for a long time, and some of you listening, I know, fall into that group, there's a whole other set of things that are going on when you show up into a room and other people show up and you do this yoga practice with them. There's these layers of what's happening there. And I guess that's what's most interesting to me, is what are these like little subtle things that are happening that lead to what feel like transformational experiences for people. I got an email this week from somebody that really touched my soul. Like, those of you who are yoga teachers know that every once in a while you get that one note or you get that one person who shares with you what your class has meant for them. And it's kind of everything. And I've just been reflecting on, well, why is it that with that person I have that experiences and I don't necessarily have it with others? And what am I doing in that process? And what am I not doing in that process? And I think that it's true across different modalities. It's not just yoga. Like last week, I was talking with my friend Shara about psychedelics and how some people are exploring psychedelic interventions in certain ways, and the process of whether or not that's really going to help someone or be transformational, dependent on all of these other subtle things like intention and setting and all these other things. And some kind of exchange between people, between like the facilitator and the person who's engaging in it. And it is also true in acupuncture, which I am going to discuss today with my old friend, Britta Van Dun. I know Britta from so long while back. I literally had not spoken to her for more than a decade before we recorded this conversation. She had reached out to me not so long ago because she was listening to some archived episodes about bandhas. And I remembered that she was an acupuncturist, and I had this very specific experience with her when she was training with me years ago. And so I just thought it would be an interesting thing to touch base with her on what this process of healing is. And I couldn't be happier that I did, because it led to this very wonderful conversation that I'm so pleased to be sharing with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you're enjoying this show and you would like to help support it and get access to the full-length archives, perhaps you'll consider becoming a podcast premium subscriber. I don't do ads on this show, and I rely completely on listener support. Becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the primary way for you to do that. For as little as $5 a month, you can have a big impact on helping me keep this going. Also, if you want to connect with me in other ways outside of listening to this show, I do have ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group. I have an upcoming teacher training starting soon, and the early registration deadline is September 7th. All of my stuff, podcast premium, and everything else I've got on offer these days, you can find it all at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it right there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation I had with Britta Van Dun.
Hello?
Hey, Jay.
Hi, Britta.
Hi, oh my gosh. How are you?
What a blast it is to be speaking with you after all of these years. What a joy. What a pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. Thanks for making this time.
Absolutely, man. Totally. Thank you for this opportunity to chat. I love it.
No, me too. Me too. And I don't know if you listen to the show. I'm already recording, so let's consider ourselves having just begun, okay?
Sure. That's great. And if it's all right, I only have an hour because I'm starting a new job today.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, we can talk about that, what the new job is, but no worries. Duly noted. I'll keep us tight. Good to know. Thank you for mentioning it. So I was thinking about you today, and first I looked back. I was like, what year was it that you and I spent some time and you did training with me at the yoga center in Brooklyn, Abhyasa? Yeah. I believe it was 2013. Do you remember that correctly as well?
It was 2011, the fall, and then 2012, I graduated, our class graduated. And I think it was because I moved to Tucson on the Ides of March, and I think the class was, we got certificates. I rode my bike over to the studio to pick up the certificate, and then I think a few hours later, I hopped on a plane to move.
Oh, wow. So that's even earlier than I thought. And those, like, to me, 2011, 2012, I think back on those as golden years for Abhyasa. Everything was so fresh and new and on the up in the neighborhood, and it hadn't gotten too expensive yet. And it was artists coming on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. and stuff. Like, you were one of those people who, like, was coming. And, you know, I want to share something with you that I don't think that you could possibly know. I have such a specific memory of you because it marked, like, this really turning point, or like new understanding for me about what I was doing in the asana practice. I mean, I was like, opening the center was this opportunity for me to just kind of do whatever I wanted because I didn't have to teach at other centers. And it was like this long process over like the 10 years of having that place, of like really letting go of some things that were conventions in the yoga world that like everybody was doing in every vinyasa class, and trying to kind of understand, well, what's really working for me, like in terms of addressing my own pain in practice. And here's the memory. I remember you in my class, and we were in poses. It was like several poses, a pigeon pose and maybe a twist. And you would lay your hands on your body while you were in the pose. And then you would breathe, and I could see you breathing to your hands. And I thought, that's it. That's like the whole thing. That's what makes the poses go from like stretching to like energy healing. Like, you were like, and I was like, the poses are just like laying hands on yourself. Mm-hmm. And you were kind of like literally actualizing that. And like these huge alarm bells were going off for me. And I always remember that about you. So thank you so much for that time together and the role you played for me in that moment. It was really important.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. How funny, the things that we're unaware of, right?
Well, I guess I'm curious about that because at that time, I do remember you were already doing some kind of like healing work, body work. Had you already gotten into acupuncture at that time? I can't remember.
Yeah, I became a licensed acupuncturist in 2010. And I had been in school for 3.5 years. And I was also working with a lot of somatic healers and a lot of people who were interested in the subtle realms. And I understood in ways that asana practice was both a prayer, and it was an opportunity for the meridians to start to open, the channels to start to clear the granthis, the knots, right? So we learn all of that in the study of yoga. And that was also being reflected and echoed in my study of Chinese medicine. And so, whereas in Chinese medicine school, we were taught a little bit more Qigong in the forms of Qigong. And with yoga, it was the flow of the practice, the vinyasa that I really loved. And it was also the mindfulness of bringing our consciousness into different areas of the body. And there was a saying that I read from a teacher so many moons ago, but it was written, and it comes from Taoist philosophy, that where the Li goes, the Qi follows. And the Li is consciousness. Qi is, for lack of a better word, energy. And so when we bring our awareness to any other part of the body, already things are changing, right? So we think of like quantum observation and things like that. And so the more I could bring consciousness and Qi into different, or prana into different areas of the body with intention, the more things started to open up.
Very interesting. And it's so interesting to hear you say like subtle realms and prayer, because I was like moving in that direction, but I didn't think of it as like consciously as I do now. Like, it was a very intuitive thing that I was just kind of going in that direction because that seemed to be what I needed. But now when I look back on it in retrospect, I mean, like we can talk about source and God and stuff like this is where my mind's at these days, but back then
for real.
It was in there, but it wasn't as obvious. But you were already kind of in that realm. Had you done like other types of yoga practice or like a lot of other yoga before you showed up at Abhyasa?
Yes, I had started practicing. Well, my first class was at Columbia while I was going to school, and it was just, who even knows what that class was, but I walked out of the class, my first class, and I was 1 or 2 inches taller. At least that's what it felt like. And I realized, okay, there's something to this. And then I don't think that I got to a yoga studio again until there was a very nearby Bikram yoga studio in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I went to the class, and I think the intensity and the heat of that environment and the repetitive sequencing was what I needed, what my nervous system needed. I needed all of that to find some kind of quiet. And one of my first classes, God bless him, one of the teachers came in and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm just like preparing to go on to a silent meditation retreat." And so I asked him about it after class, and I just thought, oh my God, that sounds horrible. Like, who would ever do that? And then of course, 6 months later, I'm on a 10-day silent retreat, right? And so for me, yoga and meditation are always together, right? We're like the 8 limbs. I learned that very early on. I was studying Tibetan Buddhism. And so I had been practicing all kinds of different yoga, asana practice. And I remember one of my early teachers too also said, this isn't just calisthenics from India. Mm-hmm. That could have even been you who said that.
Something like that. Or like, I remember some similar comment that I might have made, but I don't know if it was me or not.
Yeah. So there was always an understanding that was much deeper. And because I was entering the world of yoga around 2003, 2004, there was a purity to it. There was a wholesomeness. Like, wasn't it so sweet? It was before it was commodified, before it was commercialized.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I sometimes wonder if I'm like just like romanticizing and like looking back with these like rose-colored lenses. But I certainly seemed like when I think back to that time, like it was so not as mainstream and big business, and all the centers were independent. There wasn't any like VC corporate backed chains or any of that. And it was just a bunch of people like getting leases and hanging up signs on the front door that said yoga, and then all these people coming.
Yeah. It was so sweet. And so I there were so many people my age who were starting centers, who were teaching classes, and there was just a connectivity and a community that evolved out of it, which was really nice. And so I'd gone to a bunch of classes, from Jigaba Mukti to Greenhouse Holistic to, Dharma Mitra to here to there, Upper West Side, Lower East, just everywhere. And I think I probably yoga for the people, just like so good.
It was all those spots. Yes.
So good. So I learned something in every single class from every single teacher. And so I was just a sponge and I just loved it. And then when I came to you, I just naturally started deepening. I found like a consistency. I could bike to your place in 10 minutes and it was so easy. And I loved all the people in class, and I really loved your messaging. And I think the messaging at the time, you were at the cusp or at the advent of saying, gentleness is the new advanced. And I was right there with you. And I was like, this is my people right here. Nice. That's how I found you. And then I wanted to do the teacher training. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Well, I guess I'm curious a little bit about acupuncture, because I know I read something about you having a pretty significant experience with acupuncture yourself, which then led to you pursuing it for many, many years and pursuing degrees in it. I have had acupuncture maybe like twice in my life. And it's funny, like the thing that I went to acupuncture for has been recurring and like flared up somewhat recently, which is kind of wild to me because it was gone for a long time and then came back out of nowhere. But I always remember I did feel an immediate effect from it. And I did get herbs. He prescribed herbs that I made a tea with that definitely seemed to also help. And I remember what the diagnosis was. It was a wind cold.
Uh-huh.
And he would talk about wind entering the back of my neck and the quality of wind and how that would like move things out in disarray. And I don't know, to this day, I still think about that. But when I think about acupuncture, it's an interesting place because it kind of rides a line between like an empirical something and then like a not empirical something, a subtle realm, as you were calling it, like how it works. And like some people seem more receptive to it than others because it seems like it's not just the needles poking the tissues. I guess, first of all, maybe you would say a little bit of something about why you became interested in acupuncture, because I know it happened first for you in your own system. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think so much of where I've gone in my life has been based on a direct experience that has evolved some kind of profound revelation or some kind of transformative effect. And yoga was that, meditation is that, acupuncture was that, homeopathy has been that, like everything that I practice and offer to clients, nervous system regulation, whatever it is, right? Polyvagal theory. It's deeply affected me. So to answer the question, I was kind of a party girl when I was coming up in New York. Whoops.
I remember Limelight. And stuff. There was all kinds of places to go party. And I remember not having an ID and going into bars and drinking. And
yeah, man. So those were the days. And
sort of.
Yeah. So, but I was practicing yoga consistently. I was meditating every morning, and then I was going out at night. And and I'll just mention that I come from both lines. My mother and father, their families have been very deeply affected by addiction of all kinds. And so that was very much living in my system as well. And I started going to acupuncture because in yoga, I noticed that my left and right sides were very different. And I wanted some help with that because I couldn't seem to balance it out. So that was my reason for going. And I went in, and I think I was basically like machine gun rapid firing all of this information to the acupuncturist. And she was just like, okay, let's chill out. And I was like, yoga meditation was part of my world, but my go-to is I am like going 100 miles per hour. That's my like natural, or that's what I learned, right? That's
and New York pace. That's why we live there. That's why we thrived there. Yes.
Totally. Hop on the subway. You're here. So I went to her and she just started dropping points in, and she actually dropped in what I now understand to be the NADA protocol, which is it's for detoxification and addiction, releasing cravings and helping people. I didn't realize that, but she loaded my ears with the 5 points in each ear. And then she did a few points, I want to say, on the back. And I remember that I was deep in somewhere. I don't know where I was, some realm. And then I started to come to, and it was what I saw in my mind's eye was a dark sea, and it was a cloudless night, all stars, the moon was shining, and I was watching waves lap over the sides of a volcano, and the lava from the volcano was just dripping into the water of the sea. And I was completely mesmerized. And then the practitioner came back into the room, and it was like, oh, whoa, where was I? And only later did I realize, wow, I was observing the elements. Chinese medicine is in some ways very much about the 5 elements. And I was seeing like the steam, connect from the water and the fire. And so it was just very profound. And I felt extraordinarily different, and I couldn't describe how. And then the next time I went to acupuncture, I was hungover, and I was so hungover that I was maybe still drunk. And I like went there, and I was late, and I was like, bags everywhere, and, just a mess. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And she was so compassionate. And she was just like, no problem. Let's just do what we can today. She dropped in those needles. After that session, I had no desire to smoke, no desire to drink. Like I got more peaceful with food, and my meditations and my yoga was totally different. And I was like, I want to do this.
You're like, I've been doing all this yoga and all this other stuff. This works great. So what do you think, especially now that you've studied it, what do you think happened? Like, what is that? What's the process that goes on in terms of like, at least in terms of you, because there's such an interpretation in terms of like energy bodies and how energy, you know what I mean? I've had lots of different people on. I've been doing the show for like 10 years now. So people have all these different kind of ways that they hold it or ways they think about it.
Yeah.
Usually, sometimes it comes from the training they've had and the teachers they've had that they take that, but sometimes it comes from because like it first happened to them and then they figure out what happened. Sounds like that with you. So what do you think is that process? Why did it have such a profound effect on you? And it might not, because I know other people who are like, yeah, I didn't feel anything. So what do you think it is that makes someone more open? Or what do you think the process is of those points being dropped that leads to that kind of thing in a person?
Yeah, such a great question. If I had figured out the formula, I mean, right? But yeah. I for me, one, everything's chi. Right? Everything is energy. Everything is consciousness. And there are so many layers and realms of consciousness that are always already here that maybe we can tune into, maybe we don't. Sometimes we have access to. If we're lucky, it becomes a clear stream. And I think so much about being human and living in these physical, so-called physical bodies, let's say denser bodies, is remembering, being able to access these different layers of consciousness, of awareness, of really remembering who we truly are. And I believe that this practitioner, however humble she seemed on the outside, knew what she was doing. And she placed a lot of spirit points. And, you know, all points are spirit points, because if we understand that everything is chi, emotions are chi, spirit is chi, the physical body is chi, it's all chi. You place a point in there, you're reaching every single level, body, mind, spirit.
Okay, so when you put a needle in someone's ear or whatever, one of those points, I guess that's the kind of subtle question I'm interested in, is like the connection between the physical body and the energy body. Because sometimes, like, for instance, I'll tell you, I have a bias about it in the sense that, you know, like in yoga, sometimes they've talked about your energy centers. And like, if you do deep back bending and you open your chest, then you're opening your heart. And I've sort of call bullshit on that, because I think you can do really deep back bending and be totally closing your heart while you're doing it. Like the physicality in and of itself isn't the energy center. Now, it could be that you would be opening your heart, and that movement of opening up like that might actually be helpful potentially in that. But the physicality in and of itself isn't it. So the physical body isn't the energy body. So how do you think that the point of the needle into the physical body also connects to the energy body?
Great question. So I think it's all vehicles. And I think a lot of it is intention and a lot of what we're open to. And I think that there's like beyond time space, there's also timing and space, right? So, gosh, how would I articulate this?
I know it's a totally impossible question.
Let me
acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, it's like, let's talk about the ineffable. So, but what I understand, it's, you know, and I don't really even need needles a lot of the time, right? I mean, any practitioner who's worked with bodies for a while, it's not just bodies that are connecting. I'm not just touching my finger to a physical, like a leg, right? It's like the heart light, the intention, all of it is a part of any form of contact that we make before we even physically touch a body. So there's intention, there is a connectivity that happens. Sometimes the practitioner and the client their songs of who they are so resonant that something just shifts, right? There are these vibrations, there are frequencies. I don't know who's going to have a profound experience in a session. Sometimes I think, whoa, all right, this is going to be incredible. And then I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Like I'm not really seeing the kind of change I anticipated. And I do agree with you about the idea of like the chakras and the energy centers. And like, we're going to put a block behind our shoulder blades and then everybody's going to walk out of here in love with each other. And it's just like, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Forcing your body into stuff ain't going to open your heart, I don't think.
Right. Because ultimately the physical is kind of like it's the caboose on the train, right?
Yeah.
Everything starts with consciousness and then it blooms from there in this kaleidoscopic churning into embodiment into the physical.
Yeah, I guess that is sort of the paradox. Like there is a connection between energy bodies and physical bodies. It's just not the kind of linear connection that is sometimes kind of gets painted as.
Yeah.
It dips into other realms, which is an interesting thing that we've talked about here on the show quite a bit. Because it started with conversations around intuition, like how much do, teachers rely upon like kind of form and training, and how much of it over time, after you've done it for 10, 20 years, you're just kind of showing up. It's not like you're planning classes and you're going through some process, which is kind of like what I hear you talking about, where you're feeling into people's songs. I like that you called it people's songs. Like I have often thought of it as like frequencies, like people have different kind of frequencies. And I think you get better at kind of being able to tune into different frequencies or find a frequency that is harmonious between mine and theirs or something. And that is the process of an exchange that happens. So in a way, it's similar. Like the asanas kind of don't matter in the same way maybe the needles don't matter, right? Like you said, they're vehicles, like some kind of ritual or process we go through. Do you think the needles are more for like the client or more for you? Probably both.
I would say both, and it really depends on where the practitioner and the clients are. And then on a different hand or on the same hand is also there is a real science to acupuncture and Chinese medicine, right? There's thousands and thousands of years of observation. If I stick a point in this particular spot, these kinds of reactions will occur, and that it's been studied for so long that I know that if I, put a point in kidney 2, it's going to have a very profound effect in a very specific way. Or, as you were kind of describing your right shoulder, where you're just kind of like, oh, this, the pathogenic influence of wind, and then it kind of gets stuck in there, right? And then the muscles start to protect and everything's on board. And then you have this holding pattern. And so there are specific points like down the arm and in the neck and like on the leg that can help with that shoulder. And then there's also going to be the ashi or the local points where you can actually just kind of tease that muscle. So you're physically, anatomically teasing the muscle that's in a held contraction into relaxing and vesiculating and opening up. So that would be trigger point release. So there's all these layers and points of entry. And they're all valuable, right? Because they're as above, so below, maybe not linear, maybe not directly, but right, we're kind of aware of these different possibilities in the way that you're describing, like a very good yoga teacher is going to be aware of like, oh, I get it. Like this is what the class is needing. And I trust myself, or I trust the surrender enough to call out poses in a sequence that is intuitively coming to me, because there's a reverberation with the community, with the room.
Right. So I guess that's the interesting question I'm thinking about, is that, there's this science that you said, that there's even sort of, it sounds to me kind of protocols, like, oh, if there's, this, if you observe this, I'm sure there's diagnostic rituals that you do to sort of figure out what you see going on in someone's body, and you don't have to do it with words, or I imagine words could help, but sometimes it wouldn't even have to be words. And there's kind of these protocols that you could learn, but the protocols in and of themselves can't be the end of it. Like,
right.
Because you were just saying that there's then that's the moment where it becomes an intuitive thing, where you're kind of allowing like a a process to unfold in some way.
Yeah.
And then you are potentially drawing upon something that isn't necessarily you or doesn't feel like you.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's true for what you're doing in acupuncture as well?
Absolutely. And I really hope that that's the case, that I'm getting out of the way as much as possible, that I'm listening with my heart and I'm listening with my whole body. My whole body is an instrument. As an empath, like I pick up emotional layers, right? Physiologically, I'm, kinesthetic. I feel a lot of things physiologically in other people. I can see, oh, this person's really holding a lot of tension in their belly, right? Let's draw their awareness to that. Let's bring their awareness to it so then they can breathe through it. And then maybe it starts to just unfold and unwind on its own, right? So there's so many different ways that we can apply this. And I was talking to, just in the same way that I think I've heard you describe yoga poses as outlines, right? They're just ideas. They're just like, let's see what happens. But then it's really like the flow of the chi. I remember in some of your classes, and I think it was in your classes that I first started to feel this, where I felt like my intention was in the energy body, and then the muscular physical body was hanging on that energy body as if the energy was a hanger and that the physical was then just sort of following the lead of the energy.
Yes. Well, that would make sense because we're centering breath so much, right? And the pranayama aspect of the way that I am engaging asana, that makes perfect sense to me, that the physical body rides on the energy body. That makes perfect sense. I guess I'm curious, in the training that you do, in the sort of science of acupuncture or whatever, do they teach about like surrender over to mystical realms?
Some do. It really depends on the teacher and the philosophy. And, what was taught at the time, back when I was in school, was traditional Chinese medicine, which was a conglomeration of thousands of years of traditions and family lineages and all. And some were very Taoist and philosophical and very deep, very spiritual. And it became this, here's a point palette. Here, this point does this point does this. These are the functions. This is what it do. If your intention is this, you can release heat. You can also tonify by, sort of moving the needle this way. So there was a lot of focus on the physiological. But when I talk to practitioners who've been practicing for a very long time, like one of my friends the other day said, we don't even really need needles. And I was like, yeah, I agree. And also, but the needles are also very helpful and they do stuff. And they're very helpful. And, I remember when I was in school, a teacher said, I was like trying to, I wanted to get the absolute correct classical location of a point. And I was just like, I just can't work around this particular anatomical structure to insert it at the right depth. And he said, well, the meridians move. A meridian is going to move to where you are and where you're messing around. So don't get too hung up on the location. But then other teachers would say, you really need to know, you really have to know your points. You need to know your anatomical structures. And it's all so valuable. It's all relevant.
Yeah, but even the anatomical structures have a lot of variance to them. They're not all the same. So the idea that there's one point that's going to be exactly the same on everybody, that's crazy that would be the case, right? It would have to be movable.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. All right. So had you already started treating people in acupuncture when we were training together? Were you doing that in New York?
I was, I was practicing out of my little apartment in Brooklyn, and it was basically friends at first, and then it was all free, of course. And then once I had my sea legs, I think I charged maybe $40 a session, and I would usually spend 2 hours with people. And I was also doing a lot of the intuitive work. My background was in counseling psych, and I had master's degrees in counseling psychology. And so I would just spend time just listening and talking and hearing about things. And I was so blessed because my neighbor, literally next door on the same floor of the Habemeyer Flats, she suffered from terrible sciatica, and we were the same age. And so she would kind of hobble over to my apartment, and then she was my guinea pig. And I learned, and she was very meridian sensitive, very energy sensitive. And so she could tell me, oh, I felt that travel from here all the way to here. So she started to verify what I was learning. You learn the meridian system in the same way that you might look at a 3-dimensional subway map. And so I was like, what she was saying corroborated what I was learning in school. So it really deepened my faith and learning. And yeah.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.